Hi Ty, how are you?
Hi, Greg. Doing good. So, welcome everybody to episode 2 of Climate Basics, a podcast where we try to bring a optimistic and realistic perspective to all of the green tech. Today,
Right,
we're going to be talking about eco-villages and sustainable cities.
right. And maybe you can start everyone off by explaining a little bit about eco villages. I can tell you I wasn't very familiar with that term, and after having read it, it's pretty impressive what some places have done with regards to sustainability.
Absolutely. So eco-villages, it's a catch-all term meaning a lot of different approaches to design, some based on permaculture, some on indigenous technologies, some on the most innovative solutions that they can think of, passive solar homes, geothermal building, water collection, regenerative energy uh, production on site, microgrids, small-scale farming, community networks of support, alternate forms of organization and collaboration. So really, you've probably already heard of an eco village, you just didn't know that was a term applicable to it. This includes a lot of intentional communities, a lot of regeneratively designed cities, both new and decades old. Uh, Really, it's probably easier to talk about examples than to try to give a solid definition of such an amorphous topic.
Right. Yeah. Do you have any examples sort of off the top of your head, Ty, about say one that people might be interested in looking up?
Yeah, sure. Ithaca, New York, for example, well known for the prestigious college there, also is a small town that's home to a really effective and fairly old uh, intentional community of permaculturalists, farmers, and kind of back to the land types. And so Ithaca is part Cornell and part this rich mostly rural sustainability attempt, and it really it's just one example that works for upstate New York. It's
Right.
not going to be the same type of thing that you see in Australia, for example, with Crystal Waters, which is another really big, really old intentional community. And it's not going to be the same as any of the other ones you find in the States, whether that's Earthship Biotecture out in the Southwest or any of the even newer designs that are being built in some of the Middle East. And really, every single example is going to have different types of architecture, different approaches to community organizing and resilience, and of course, different ecosystems that they're trying to build those villages into, right? So it's very much site-based and very much built around the needs and desires and ideals of each community participating.
Right. And so if the community already exists, and so this is not a say a planned community, then in the United States there are just so many towns that are fairly small, 10,000 people, give or take, or what have you. And so I guess part of part of the message is that if people want to be more sustainable, then it would take some sort of deliberate planning of bylaws and zoning or encouragement of solar or what have you.
Uh, Generally, there is an upfront capital investment to switch over what is the standard infrastructure to something that is independent and regenerative and based on just what grows locally and what water is available locally.
Right,
Most eco villages try to essentially plan and build within their means. So that means that there's a natural population cap for any given region based on what can healthily be produced as extra nutrients and water supply in that biome for that ecosystem.
right,
Which is why most eco villages are rural experiments rather than urban ones. But a
right,
lot of the design components that we see in eco villages around the world, a lot of the innovations they came up with can be applied to suburban and urban life.
right.
And that's also very exciting.
And in terms of, so I mean, for city folk, for people who live in cities, whether large or small or what have you, but can they get in on part of this action? I mean, are there ways of making their cities more sustainable along the lines of what the eco villages preach?
There is always a way to make your city more sustainable.
Right.
Absolutely. What is the maximum efficiency? Was the maximum effectiveness of those adaptations you make? Depends on how much people power and how much political power can be assembled behind those ideas, and of course, the limitations of the cities. If you're trying to fix Phoenix, Arizona's water problem, it's going to be a little bit more difficult than fixing the water problem in, say, Chicago or Toronto or Cleveland, where we're
Right.
sitting on Great Lakes, automatically having access to 20% of the world's global freshwater supply,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, you're right. What comes to mind is like Germany, for example. Germany has had an explosion, and very deliberately so, but an explosion of balcony solar, or I'm not sure if that's a term, but yeah, balcony
Yeah,
solar or
rooftop
solar.
solar. Yeah.
Right, right. Where they deliberately provided, I think, incentives, and so that's an interesting sort of model because that actually does require government, um, I guess, sanction, but government push as well. Because when you're deliberately pushing people to be a little less reliant on the grid, then there are spiral effects. Because, of
hmm
course, the hub and spoke traditional system over the past 125 years or what have you, it's being built on a central energy generation plant, first coal, then natural gas now, and sometimes nuclear. And then you've got the transmission lines, which send that electricity to the city. And it might be a matter of 10 miles away, or it could be 100 miles away, or what have you. But that amount of control, it creates a system where then all capital costs get divided amongst the citizens. And so,
Yeah.
in order to encourage your citizens to go off and get cheap solar energy, you're asking them to very willingly, go off grid, which then affects the profit margins that your utilities can charge.
Meaning
Yeah,
that there's a natural friction between the powers that want to have centralized control, centralized power, centralized economies, and these kind of spin-off groups that want to have local autonomy of food, of energy, maybe even of gas education,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So that's why the first couple generations of eco villages that have been created around the world, they were very much these back to the land movements, these something's wrong with modern society. We need to step back and, you know, as the kids these days say, touch grass again, right?
right,
But that isn't an inherent contradiction. There are ways to build urban spaces and semi-urban spaces as regenerative to nature and working with the flows of water and the flows of energy to make sure that everything is harvested effectively without detracting from the rest of the ecosystem.
right, right.
A design concept that I think really embodies this, what we're starting to see around is sponge cities. Are you familiar with the term?
Right. Yeah. Maybe you can explain it to, I don't know a lot about it, but I've read a little bit about it. But yeah, maybe you can explain to people what that
Right.
is.
So essentially, using green spaces not just to provide pretty parks, but also to absorb large amounts of water and refill the aquifers, the pools of water underneath the ground that many, many cities around the world, many human populations are completely dependent on for
Right.
agriculture and fresh water. So the idea is essentially water pools up on an impermeable surface until it flows off and possibly takes out some buildings on the way out down towards the coast. You
Right.
don't want that. You want permeable surfaces that the water can flow into the earth the same way it did back when that land was a forest or a
Right.
savanna or what have you.
Right. And you're purposely, as a city, you're purposely targeting, I guess, problem areas. And then what you're doing is you're deliberately returning the water back to where you need it, essentially, to where it's going to be more sustainable.
Well, problem areas, honestly, where the interventions have to go is where the water is flowing from, not where the water ends up flowing to.
I
So if
see.
you only focus on an area that gets flooded all the time, but you don't deal with upriver where that water is coming from, you're going to have to do a lot more adaptation than if you
Right.
go and just reduce and slow down the water flowing to those regions. So rather than dealing just the valley, deal in what is the terrain like in the hills leading down into that valley? How
Right.
fast does the water flow when it rains in a normal rain? And then the other consideration is it's not always normal rain these days. We have this outdated concept of a century storm, but century storms happen every few years now for a lot of the world, right? So sponge cities are also a way to adapt to the severe climate effects of climate change without significantly changing your city.
Right. And do you have any examples of cities that have been doing this?
Yeah, New York is building a lot actually. So is Singapore. Some coastal cities in southern China are also kind of on the front line of this work.
Right.
But even my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio, has some really great sponge city infrastructure that's being built all over. And
Really?
this is a good thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, you can even take a triangle park, and instead of us having it be flat grass that somebody comes and mows, you can have stepped levels and retention so that water flows towards there, interacts with the clay and the substrate of the soil, and
Right.
slowly percolates in towards the rest of the aquifer
Right.
rather than just blowing over and damaging everybody's basements on the next block.
Right.
And
Well,
it's not nearly as expensive to dig out some land and plant some more trees and bushes and shrubs than you normally would, compared with all of the money lost to flood damage.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, New York City is such a beacon for the world in so many ways. But, when New York City floods and you see water just pouring out of subway stations, the whole world
Yeah.
sees that. And, I think like you said, I think we've seen that sort of too many times over the past 10 to 15 years. It's just remarkable how often it happens.
And it's happening in more cities that you wouldn't normally expect to have flooding problems too. So
Right, right,
this is something that basically every city should be looking at. So
right,
we have eco villages for rural spaces. We have sponge city design and Miyawaki forests and other really intensive use of green space for urban design. What about the suburbs? How do you take suburban land, which I think slightly more than half of all Americans now live in suburbs?
yeah.
How do you take that type of development and make it compatible with regenerative design, with positive impact on the local ecosystem?
You build more Walmart parking lots because that benefits everybody.
Definitely not the correct answer.
Right,
Thank you.
right,
Yes,
okay,
that's
yeah,
oh,
yeah.
no.
Yeah, well, in the suburbs, of course, then you have the benefit of space, although I guess the cost factor becomes difficult with a sort of a lesser population spread out over a bigger space.
It
But
becomes
cities,
more difficult to provide urban amenities like regular bus lines and
right,
complete sewer to a centralized water treatment. But it also gets easier for some other things, like having effective food gardens and space for animals. So there are some things that suburbs can be redesigned to do even better, and just other things that we shouldn't be expecting them to be able to provide the same as if you were actually living in an urban space.
right. Is Europe, I guess, ahead of the States with regards to this? I mean,
Europe is not the same type of entity as the cities we're used to in the Americas. This is because most of the cities were built long before cars were available. So you have this kind of reversal in a lot of American cities. The poorer people live in the center nearby the industrial sites and the air pollution, and the rich people live a half hour or an hour away in cute little suburbs or
right,
semi-rural areas with overly large McMansions.
right,
In Europe, it's almost the opposite. People that have enough money will have an apartment in the city and a farmhouse way out in the country.
right,
And if you're going to school or you're in the city all the time for work, you live in the apartment. And if you are young or old or a farmer, you live out in the country.
right. Yeah, yeah.
And then
Well,
the people who are less wealthy, they live in an outer ring, kind of like the suburbs of the Americas.
right. Well, the U.S. as well as other countries, I mean, certainly Canada and in the bigger cities, we do the same. But yeah, when the city is designed for cars, then of course you get half the cars being SUVs, but they're designed by happen chance, somewhat on purpose in the sense that it's almost a safety issue, right? Like you can have a much better quality of life living in the suburbs when you need a private vehicle to get there. And it takes a solid 30, 35 minutes from the center of the city to live there. And the malls are nice and it's safe or what have you. And then, and the only public transportation that is available is in this city core or what have you. So then
Right.
if you don't have money, then you're almost forced to live in a certain region as opposed to out in the suburbs. So.
Right. So there's this natural, well, very unnatural economic filter that happens that kind of alienates and isolates suburban spaces from what's happening in the rest of the city. Again, Europe doesn't have that because it doesn't have the same types of constraints. The center of the city is not a source of crime and unhappiness. It's where all the rich people are, actually. It's full of walkable areas where it's safe to go at night and nobody's going to shoot you. I know I'm still getting used to it as an American living in Europe, but it is a radically different type of experience being in a city at night in Europe versus in the Americas. And think about that. What use is a suburb if you're not afraid of the city? If the city is actually where the amenities are.
Right, right. Staying with the sort of the concepts of the eco village, district heating, does that sort of fall within the concept of sustainability, of trying to lessen the carbon footprint?
It, depending on how it's used, absolutely. A lot of
Okay,
eco villages consist of individual earth sheltered or even geothermal buildings that share one heat pump and circulate through all of the buildings close to each other. In other cases, you have photovoltaic microgrids that are community owned and operated, distributed on everybody's houses with one central storage.
right,
Uh, Again, it varies so much eco village to eco village, but for the most part, yeah, you see local distributed design and local ownership of these networks, of these critical
right.
infrastructure pieces. Some
Yeah,
of
I
them even
was,
are in are small rockable parts of larger normal urban cities. There are sustainability walkable 10-minute, 15-minute city designs in Texas.
who knew?
Who knew?
Well, Texas, Texas is actually because they encourage business and so they pull back on the regulation. They really are just a renewable energy leader. I mean, they're a solar leader. Batteries are just bursting there, wind power as well. And
They
so
are the second biggest economy of the US.
yeah, for sure. And they're bigger than many, many countries. And it's very interesting to hear the politics that you see at the federal level or a lot of the state level in terms of the nonsense that comes out of the politicians' mouths and they're bad-mouthing renewable energy, for example. And yet Texas is making a ton of money and also
They're also
benefit.
building it, yes.
Yeah, and they're really benefiting from it as well. And so it's
Yeah.
just yeah, that
Well,
disconnect is interesting.
they're getting on board with it now. There are eco villages that have been doing this for 40 and 50 years
Right.
and always knew that renewable energy was going to be the way to go. Uh, what I think is most important to think of here, eco villages are just one type of example of how generally everybody has the option to choose a regenerative lifestyle. And it is not as simple as buying an EV or cutting out meat or not flying as much. It's where does your garbage go? How much garbage do you create? Where does your food come from? How far away? There are inherent carbon costs to every step of every production line. And thinking about how you can minimize those gets to having someone think not just in an individualist perspective, but at the community level, because it's at the community level when you've got dozens of families working together, maybe even up to thousands of people at a time, in the case of the larger eco villages, all deciding together how to localize their energy, their garbage, and their food.
right,
Also, their water. That's the other big one to really think about. Uh,
right,
permaculture-based eco-villages feature some of the most effective water engineering I've ever seen. Really is
right,
inspiring stuff.
right. Yeah. Well, I guess, and we have about 8 minutes left here. I guess it's really when people have eco anxiety, when climate change, depression hits or what have you, it's I guess just important to know that there are lots, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of examples all over the world of people trying to make a difference,
Yeah,
and then just trying to scale that towards sort of the city where a lot of people do live. People do feel helpless because it's like, well, what can I do? But um, going back to basics, using a little bit less and being more mindful of what you use does actually contribute tremendously to helping to have a lower footprint for your city. I mean,
yeah,
consuming
absolutely.
less or what have you, like you said, and
And
then making small changes where you're able to, like the solar balcony or what have you. That
it's a
also,
contentious topic, honestly, the individual carbon footprint, because on the one hand, it was invented by a giant fossil fuel corporation,
right,
BP,
right,
as a marketing ploy to get us to stop thinking of the giant factories and fossil fuel refineries
right,
as being the core problem. They
right,
are the majority of the problem.
right,
We're talking for just land use change, electricity, and manufacturing,
right.
more than half of all of the CO2 in the atmosphere right now,
But
significantly more.
the reason why it's a popular concept and why there's uptake is because people do want to help out. So it's,
It's actionable.
right. People do want to help
Yes,
out. And so that speaks to a lot of people, which is, okay, what is my carbon footprint? Please don't ask me to do something that's incredibly radical, but can you give me some suggestions as to how to pull back a little bit? And and so I think the anxiety comes in when you pull back and you're trying to do your bit, but then you see sort of overall that it's not making that big of a difference. But I guess, really it's important for everybody to know that you have to keep the faith. I think better times are coming because with technology finally being cheaper than conventional technology when we're talking about energy generation. This is where I think solar and batteries are really starting to proliferate. I think we're just at the cusp of this. And I think that in 5 years and 7 years and 10 years, it's going to just seem so obvious that solar and batteries were going to take over. And yet we're on the cusp of it, especially in the United States. I think in the United States, it really depends on where you live. It really depends on what information you allow into your daily life. Because if you're in an internet bubble with algorithms, you will never see the transformation which is happening around the world.
absolutely. And it's not just energy either. There
Right,
are reports from the Food and Agricultural Administration, from the UN, that in fact regenerative farming is more efficient. You get more calories per acre than industrial farming. It's
right,
just a matter of making that transition.
right,
So, yes, it is easy to think of, okay, flying less, eating no meat or less meat, maybe walking or biking to work or taking the bus instead of driving. Those are actionable.
right.
And then
Or
full
two and three
scale
wheelers,
transformation.
two and
Yeah,
three wheelers. Yes.
and
Uh,
then full-scale transformation of entire industrial processes, that takes longer and requires collaboration across corporations, governments, and workers, right? But there's a medium scale where you're working with your community and you're figuring out what 5 or 10 or 20 people you could actually live with all year round farming, and and if you find that community, you make an eco village, and that is an option that exists in every state, in every country, all the way around the world. There
right.
is not a place you won't be able to find one.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. But if you're not ready to cash in your chips and go all in on the lifestyle, then there still are many applicable sort of sustainability concepts that you can
Yeah.
apply and also just sort of pay attention to realize that change is happening, right?
Yeah, like the virtual power plants, like community gardens, like just more engagement with your neighbors that you do have already in your non-eco village.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. It's funny for cities. I mean, everyone's rushing around daily life, and everyone's just trying to get through the Monday to Friday or what have you, and it's difficult to see what changes can come. But yeah, I think change is inevitable, obviously, but also towards sustainability. I think all cities it will be in their benefit to start moving to not only the technology, but also, like you said, whether it's sponge city techniques or whether or not it's trying to create more walkable neighborhoods, like you said. I think that that's in the cards basically for any city that wants to be successful.
In fact, sustainability is inevitable because anything that is not sustainable is going to eventually be supplanted by what is.
Right, right. Amen. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, couple minutes left here, Ty. Is there anything else that you think that people should know about this sort of concept of sustainable living?
They should know that it is achievable. It can be done whether you're urban, suburban, or rural. It can be done starting with your own personal actions and expanding out into your community. And we're going to be talking about it more in upcoming episodes, including our next one, where we're going to be talking about hydropower.
Hydropower, yes. Now,
Yes.
there's lots of criticism about hydropower, but at least from my sort of limited viewpoint, I mean, geez, for your bang for your buck, and then if you're able also to put some of the floating solar panels on your hydropower, if you're able to use the hydro dam as even pumped hydro as a battery, then you've just got a very sustainable, very efficient way of generating energy here that isn't going to, as with oil and gas, require you to keep on digging, keep on burning, keep on destroying the environment.
That's right. And, we'll be getting into it more next episode, but I think that we can really look at hydropower as kind of one of these flagship techs. Unlike so much green tech, this is actually something that's been around for so long. It's so established that it's accepted practice across the board. No one can look at Niagara Falls and say, "Oh no, there's no way you could get electricity from that." We've been reliably doing so for 100 years,
Right.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when we deal with that, let's just leave a little note for ourselves. I think that we might have to also just acknowledge that hydropower brings some difficulties, very real difficulties between countries that share the water. So downstream countries getting very upset at upstream countries or what have you. We have a couple of live examples here, Africa and also India and China. So I think we should
Yeah.
probably give a shout out when we do that episode to
And
those
we're the right
issues.
people to talk about that, since as a Canadian in
Right,
Toronto and an
right,
American from Cleveland,
right,
you and I are part of the custodianship of the Great Lakes, which again
right.
is 1/5 of all of the fresh water on the planet and a very delicate resource that has not always been managed effectively.
No, thank goodness there's enough water to mismanage it, at least for now. So,
But we'll get
okay,
into that next time.
right. Well, 30 seconds left. Thank you very much, Ty. Anything else about Eco Villages, or do you think you covered the?
Google one nearby you and go and check it out, and come back and listen for our next episode.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Ty.
Thanks. Later, Greg.